The first real crisis in Christian history wasn't about doctrine. It was about a dinner table. Not about the resurrection, not about who Jesus was, about who was allowed to sit down and eat together. And it got bad enough that two of the most important men in the early church had a public fight about it. Peter on one side, Paul on the other, in front of everyone. To understand why a meal could do that, you have to start with what the law actually said. Leviticus is specific. Some animals are clean, some are not, pigs are not. No split hoof, no chewing the cud, no eating it. That's the rule stated plainly. But the food rules were never only about food. They were about being marked out, being visibly different. A people surrounded by empires, keeping an identity through what they would and wouldn't put in their mouths. Which is exactly why changing it was so violent. You weren't editing a recipe, you were editing who you were. So when Christianity started letting non-Jews in, the question wasn't theoretical. It was practical, and it was daily. There's a line in Mark chapter 7 that people quote constantly. It's easy to miss what it's attached to. Jesus is arguing about hand-washing, ritual purity, whether you're defiled by what you touch. And he says the thing that goes into a person doesn't defile them. What comes out does. Then Mark adds a short comment of his own. Thus he declared all foods clean. That one clause did enormous work later, but notice something. It's the narrator explaining, not a command being issued. And notice something else. Nobody acts on it for years. The disciples keep the food laws long after this. Which tells you the question was still very much open. Then comes Acts chapter 10, and the most misunderstood vision in the New Testament. Peter is hungry, waiting for lunch, and falls into a trance on a rooftop. He sees a sheet lowered from the sky, full of animals, clean ones and unclean ones mixed together. A voice says, "Get up, kill, and eat." Peter refuses outright. He's never eaten anything unclean in his life, and he isn't starting now. And the voice answers, "What God has made clean, you must not call common." 3 times, then the sheet goes back up. Now most people stop reading here, and if you stop here, it's obviously about food. But the story keeps going, and what happens next changes everything. Peter wakes up confused, and immediately men arrive at the gate, sent by a Roman centurion. They want him to come to the house of a Gentile, which a devout Jew was not supposed to enter. And Peter goes, and when he arrives, he explains himself out loud. He says God has shown him he should not call any person common or unclean. Any person, the vision used animals. Peter applied it to human beings. That's the text's own interpretation of itself. It's not a reading someone imposed later. But one man's rooftop vision doesn't settle a movement. The argument kept growing. Gentiles were joining in large numbers, and a faction insisted they had to become Jewish first. Circumcision, the law of Moses, the whole framework. Otherwise, they said, you're not really in. So around the year 50, the leaders met in Jerusalem to decide it. Acts chapter 15. This is the first church council, and the stakes were enormous. Get it wrong, and the movement splits in two. The decision was that Gentile believers did not have to take on the law of Moses. No circumcision requirement, not bound by the dietary law. But they added 4 things to abstain from: food sacrificed to idols, blood, anything strangled, and sexual immorality. That list looks strange to us. 3 of the 4 are food rules in a decision that just said food rules don't apply. The usual reading is that these were practical. Things that would make shared meals impossible between Jewish and Gentile believers. In other words, the council's compromise was also about the dinner table. It was trying to keep everyone at it. You'd think that settles it. A council decided. It's written down. Everyone agreed. It did not settle it, and what happened next is one of the sharpest moments in the New Testament. Paul tells the story himself in his letter to the Galatians. So we have it from someone who was in the room. Peter comes to Antioch, and at first he eats with the Gentile believers, openly, regularly. Then some men arrive from Jerusalem, from James, and Peter changes his behavior. He pulls back, stops eating with the Gentiles, separates himself. Paul says plainly why: out of fear. Peter was afraid of what the group from Jerusalem would think. And others follow him. Even Barnabas, Paul's own traveling companion, goes along with it. So Paul confronts him, not privately, in front of everyone. He says, if you, a Jew, live like a Gentile, how can you force Gentiles to live like Jews? It's a remarkable passage. One apostle publicly accusing another of hypocrisy, preserved in Scripture, unedited. The early church did not tidy this away. They kept the argument in the record. Here's what makes sense of the intensity. In the first century, you did not eat with just anyone. Sharing a table was a statement. It said, this person is my equal. Which means refusing to eat with someone was also a statement, and everyone present understood it. When Peter withdrew, he wasn't making a private dietary choice. He was publicly demoting people. That's why Paul's response is so sharp. He isn't arguing about menus. He's arguing that the demotion is a lie about the gospel. So every part of this fight looks like it's about food, and none of it is. So when did Christians actually stop keeping kosher? There's no single moment. It wasn't one decree, it was gradual, a slow erosion over generations. The main driver was simple demographics. The church kept getting more Gentile. As Christianity spread through the Roman Empire, the proportion of Jewish believers shrank. And practices that had been assumed by everyone became practices kept by a minority, then by almost nobody. Theologically, the church settled on the view that the food laws belonged to the ceremonial law, and that it had passed. Which is the answer you'll usually be given today, and it's a fair summary of where it landed. But it isn't how it happened. It's the conclusion, written up after the fact. The actual story is messier, a vision that confused the man who had it, a council that issued a compromise, and two apostles shouting at each other in Antioch because one of them stopped sitting down to dinner. That's what it cost, not a rule change, an argument about whether the people at your table are your equals. They were never really arguing about pork. Not every branch of Christianity dropped the food laws, some never did. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church still avoids pork, still removes blood from meat, still follows much of Leviticus 11. They read those rules as a standing command that was never withdrawn, nearly 2,000 years unbroken. Their fasting is stricter than anyone's too, around 180 fasting days a year for ordinary believers. So the question the church argued about in Antioch was never fully closed. One branch simply kept the old answer. They were never really arguing about pork.